Okay, so my name is Laura Wong and I'm going to be facilitating the webinar today. In the room in the office here with me, I also have Paul Meehan and Dave Chaplin. And then joining us remotely are Joe Lambert and Paul Needham, who are going to be speaking later on. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, could you please pop these into the chat panel? You should be able to open it down the bottom middle of the screen if you haven't found it already. And then we'll pick those questions up at the end. Okay, so the purpose of this webinar today is to provide an information update on Release 5 in the context of JUSP. It's part of a package of webinar and support that we're going to be providing over the coming months to help support you in the move from Counter Release 4 to Counter Release 5. As I said, the focus of this webinar is going to be very much on providing you with an information update on progress and what's coming up next. We're not going to be recovering any information about the reports in any great detail. However, we will be running another webinar in late April, where we'll be going into much more detail about the reports and how you use them and sort of going through common workflows. So to start off with today, Paul Needham is going to give us an overview of the key features of Counter Release 5. And then hopefully Joe Lambert is going to outline the work that JUSP has been doing to date to prepare our current plans, the status of various supplier data, and also what you can do to help us. Paul Meehan will introduce the key changes and updates to the interface, and we'll also do a very quick demo to show you what it's going to look like. At the end, I'll flag up some resources provided by Counter that you might want to look into, and also details of further support that we're going to be offering later on in the year. And then at the end, finally, we'll open up for your questions. Right, so now I'm going to hand over to Paul Needham.
Yes, my name is Paul Needham. I'm the Research and Innovation Manager at King's Norton Library, Cranfield University, but I spend much of my time working on JISC initiatives and services and various other things. I'm here today in my capacity as a member of the JUSP team, but also as chair of the Counter Technical Advisory Group. So I hope that I do know a little bit about Release 5 by now. Why Release 5? Well, I think as many of you will know, Release 4 code of practice was complex in many ways, largely because it was an evolutionary development out of Release 3. It was very similar to Release 3, but involved a growing number of reports, metric types and formats. The reports developed almost in an ad hoc fashion and were introduced for specific purposes, but without any particular reference, I think, to existing reports. And of course, in the meanwhile, in the time that R4 has been in force, things change on the web, needs change, and things do evolve around us. And so, starting well over 2 years ago now, at Counter, we started talking about the need for a complete redrawing of the way that Counter might work going forward. And this led to what we lovingly call Release 5. And it really is an attempt to balance the complexity of the real world with an improved, streamlined approach to producing stats. So when we talk about reducing the complexity of the code, it's in the way that we've put it all together. Hopefully the end result for you as consumers of reports is that life will be easier, and also that things are much more consistent for publishers, and in the long run certainly should make it easier for them too. So with Release 5, we have worked hard to introduce far more consistency across the reports that are available. For example, all the report headers are common, which was not the case with Release 4. And we've attempted to address the problem of what we call the interface effect, which is where the way that different vendors lay out their sites can have significant difference on the sort of headline figures that you might see in reports. This is both across journal platforms and particularly, as many of you will know, in the area of book usage, where the BR1 report looked at whole book downloads, the BR2 looked at books that could be downloaded or viewed by section, and those two reports were not comparable. In release 5, we think we've now addressed that. Also, as I said, there were a couple of dozen reports in the end in release 4. In release 5, we've boiled that down to 4 master reports. Internally, each of those reports is quite involved, shall we say. So we've also defined a set of standard views that you can use for quick analysis and cost per use calculations that you'd be very familiar with. Also, something that became apparent was whether a vendor really truly was still compliant. Having had an audit under R4, we did see a couple of cases where perhaps it wasn't clear a year or two later whether they were still compliant. Now, when vendors undergo an audit under release 5, they end up with a date stamped compliance and can use a logo which shows the last date of audit. So it should be hopefully easier to see that any vendor is currently compliant as opposed to just has been compliant in the past. Next slide, please. As I say, we've boiled it down to 4 reports, master reports that is, which cover activity at the level of a platform, at the level of a database, at the level of titles, that is both books and journals, no longer necessarily have to be treated separately, and also the introduction of the item master reports. This was driven by the need really to offer a report that institutional repositories could use that would be counter compliant as well. Up to and including release 4, counter really was just for the traditional scholarly publishers. With the introduction of release 5, institutional repositories can come into the family, producing their stats in the same way that traditional scholarly publishers do, and therefore at certain key points, reports from repositories going forward will be comparable with reports that you might get from publishers. These do cover the 4 layers of activity that we think exist. As I said, they are they can be very big reports, particularly the title master report. And although it's very flexible, it certainly is helpful if there are some quick views that you have a use case. It's useful if you've got a standard view where a master report is filtered for a particular use case. So if you could show the next slide, please, Laura. So focusing, I think, particularly in the area of the title master report, which would be an area many of you would be very interested in. We have produced 7 standard views currently for the title master report, and looking at that list underneath master report for titles, you'll see some familiar looking sort of use cases. Journal requests excluding OA Gold is, for instance, a view that you would use to see the usage of your subscribed resources with a vendor excluding the OA Gold, and that would be what you can use for cost per use. I think I should, in a moment, highlight an additional benefit in the change of metric types that you can make use of in this report. You'd also be familiar with journal requests by year of publication, again excluding OA Gold. This is very similar to the JR5, but again with that free stuff that you don't really want included in your calculations of cost per use, the OA Gold excluded. In R5, we've gone to considerable effort to rationalize the metric types. We now have 2 families of metric type, investigations and requests. Investigations are, I guess, if you think of a user going to a publisher's site and just doing stuff, looking at an abstract, viewing some references, investigations are intended to give you an indication of the overall activities that go on around the usage of resources. And that does actually include the download of full text and so on, but requests are just a subset of the overall activity that goes on against any particular resource. However, requests are the bit that you're probably most interested in, because that's where a user actually has used a full article or actually downloaded a book section or a whole book, and that would be the area that you would traditionally be looking at. As part of reducing those metric types from 25 in R4 to just 12 in R5, we have eliminated format-specific metrics. So you'll no longer be seeing HTML versus PDF, because I think it would be true to say in many cases, perhaps you might have just looked at the PDF usage in calculations, but of course, if a publisher's website is set up so that a whole article appears when they click on a search result instead of just an abstract with a PDF, and then a user does read that article in HTML, that is just as valid usage as the PDF usage was. So if you look on the right-hand side, you see the eventual list of 12 metric types in release 5. The equivalent between R4 and R5. So in R4, you might have looked at FT total as a metric that you would perform calculations against, and that would be the point of connection between an R4 and an R5 report. However, in R5, we've introduced the concept of unique investigation metrics or investigations or requests. And that is, so a user might go into an article, dash off somewhere else as part of the session, dash back into that article, and each time they did that, that would add 1 to the total item investigations or requests. However, now in release 5, within a user session, however many times they dip in and out of an article, release 5 does actually count that was 1 usage of that article in that session by a user. And so that actually may be a more appropriate metric going forward, and this is something I think we'll all need to investigate together for you to use in cost per use calculations. The advantage, of course, of looking at the unique usage in a session is that it eliminates this interface effect where some publishers have things laid out so that it may trigger multiple total requests, where another publisher has a nice simple site and the same sort of activity actually would only generate 1 total item request. Unique metrics actually remove those differences between the interfaces. So for some publisher sites, you might see a large number of total item requests versus unique item requests. In other publishers, you might see the figures are quite similar, depending on how their sites have been laid out. But that unique set of metric types is the one that will give you figures that are truly comparable across the different platforms. And I think, as anyone who knows me would know, I probably could bang on for hours and hours and hours. I think those are probably some of the key points I just wanted to get across about the improvements and benefits of R5 over R4.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
So what does all of this mean for JUSP and your use of the JUSP service? So I'm going to just provide an update on the work that we've been doing to prepare for release 5. And I'll just speak briefly about next steps and what you can do before passing over to Paul for a demo. So the counter standard is clearly integral to the JUSP service and the work we do. It provides that consistency and comparability that Paul was talking of there. It's enabling you to evaluate use of your e-resources, knowing that you're comparing like with like. And combined with the Sushi protocol, which is enabling automated retrieval of counter reports, this is, essentially enabling JISP to deliver a cost-efficient and effective service. And given the scale of JUSP, where we're working with around 250 institutions and around 90 suppliers, then we're obviously reliant, to a larger extent on standards and automation. It just simply wouldn't be feasible to deliver the service otherwise. So I think, these are all things to bear in mind when thinking about development of the service. In terms of support, then the team are obviously clearly strong advocates of standards. So apart from delivering the portal itself and making data available, then we support libraries in terms of applying and using the counter reports. And we do this through our training program of workshops and webinars and events, through the range of support materials that are available on the website, through our help desk, for instance. And we work hard to make sure that the service meets library needs, and I'm sure you're aware we're constantly asking for your feedback and your ideas. We want to know how you want us to develop the service, and I think that many of you will know if any of you suggest a suitable or useful feature request or function that we think is going to benefit the majority of the user population, then we'll generally try and implement it, and we'll try and do that as quickly as possible. We also, it's important to note, provide a service to the publishers and suppliers that we're working with, helping them to test new platforms, to evaluate new reports, and to provide feedback on the development. And I think over the course of the last 6 months or so, as we've been moving towards Counter Release 5, the team has been really heavily involved in these sort of back-end developments. So I guess there's been quite a lot going on behind the scenes. So here's what we've been doing. Although we can plan to a certain extent, then ultimately JUSP is really dependent on counter-setting the standard and then suppliers implementing it. So there's been these sort of several tranches of work, so sort of looking towards the back end of last year initially. So the Code of Practice was originally published in July, and it was subsequently updated in early December. And so up to the end of the last year, obviously we were sort of waiting for the Code of Practice to be published, but some of the things that we were doing around documenting requirements, liaising with publishers to try and understand at what point they were going to be scheduling delivery of these Release 5 services, and how we might work with them. We were also developing and implementing the new service, and then where available we were testing supply reports and services. Although it has to be said, there was a very limited number of services available for testing towards the end of last year. So from January onwards, then in January the Counter Release 5 became mandatory, and January usage reports were due to be delivered in February. Once we reached February, though, there were a couple of issues that became apparent. So not all publishers were providing Release 5 reports at that particular point, and that's still the case. There are a number that are delayed while they develop or schedule development of services. And where we've been able to test reports, then in quite a number of cases, actually, we've noted some issues and we've referred those to suppliers in order to address. I think it's really important to note that for suppliers, then recognising and addressing compliance issues has been hampered to an extent by the lack of an automated tool that validates the counter reports. And this is something that Counter had commissioned and planned to make available sooner, but unfortunately this is something that was delayed for various reasons. So obviously this validation tool is going to be extremely useful from a JUSP perspective, and we're actually helping to test the latest version of the tool at the moment, and we've seen some positive results this morning. I know Paul Needham's been looking at this, and so it's good to note that this appears to be nearing completion, and once it's available I'm really hopeful that we'll start to see some more rapid progress. So looking ahead to next month, then, as you'll be aware, we initially planned to make JUSP Release 5 service available on Monday, earlier this week, but we made a decision to delay release until April, when we intend to soft launch the service. And this is primarily due to the lack of data at the moment. And at that point, when we release the service, and I think we're anticipating that to be the 1st of April, interestingly enough, we'll be providing support materials and training at that point to help you use the service effectively. So the initial service, and Paul will sort of indicate this during his demo, that service will include basic reports and what's expected to be a limited amount of data that we intend to expand as we see more compliant publishers come on board. And then from May onwards, as we hopefully start to develop these greater aggregations of data, we'll be able to develop summary and trend reports as well as data visualizations. And we'll be working with Sconnell to specify requirements for that new Sconnell report and evaluating that. And then obviously there's work that will be ongoing to evaluate the service and to adapt and develop the service to meet your needs. Okay, so this outlines the approach that we're taking to development. So we'd initially planned to stop collecting Release 4 reports at the end of last year, as obviously they're no longer compliant, but we made a decision to continue collecting Release 4 reports where it's possible to do so during this transition period of January to March. The intention, and we've already started this, is to collect Release 5 reports from January 2019. Where publishers are going to be late transitioning or not yet compliant, then the intention is at the point at which we start to implement data harvesting, then we'll backfill data back to January as they become compliant and they come on board. So there may initially be some gaps, and there's very likely to be a number of gaps, but we intend to backfill that over the course of time. As a consequence of this, and quite an interesting consequence, and we've got this overlap, or we will have this overlap of Release 4 and Release 5 data over the first 3 months of this year. And this is going to provide some really useful comparisons. And actually, Paul Meehan's already started to look at this with the publishers that we're working with and to start to sort of match up the numbers between the Release 4 and Release 5 reports. I think it's going to be a really useful exercise to help people to sort of get their heads around the new reports to a certain extent. So this is the status of supplier data at this particular point in time. So we've got 2 services in production. So we're moving we're moving some services into production. So we've started with Elsevier Science Direct and SPE, and I'm sure that Paul's going to demonstrate some of that a little bit. We've got 59 services. We're in the process of testing those services, and we may be at various points in that process. In some cases, we might have noticed particular issues or errors and referred those back to the publishers or platform providers in order to address some of those errors. There are a number in that column that we are hoping to move it over into the production column fairly imminently. So over the course of the next month, we would hope to see that column on the left-hand side populated with a greater number. Over on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got around 26 services where we don't currently have enough information for testing. So that means either a service isn't available, we don't have a correct sushi endpoint, we might be waiting for a response from a supplier, we might be waiting for sushi credentials. So a whole host of reasons. But again, the intention is to try and gather more information and move those things into that pre-production column. We will also provide some sort of a status update, so a list available via the portal in April. So there's various ways that you can help at the moment. Firstly, if you've got a subscription with OUP, then we need to obtain a new requester ID from you. So we've contacted each site rep about this already, and I know that more than 60% of you have already responded to this. Generally, we're aiming to work with suppliers on your behalf to gather sushi credentials so that you don't have to do that. You know, it's obviously when we're working at scale, it's going to be much more efficient if we can work individually with suppliers to gather those pieces of information. But there are 1 or 2 instances where we need you to do something, such as OUP. When we do need you to take action with regard to a particular supplier, then we'll contact your site rep, circulate a message on JUSP Libraries. There's a news link, a news site, and you can see a link to that on the slide here, and we'll be continuing to provide updates via that page. In early April, we'll provide this list of the suppliers in JUSP and their R5 status and where we need you to take action. I think really it's important that you continue to remind suppliers that you work with where you have a subscription of the importance of Release 5 compliance and encourage them to transition to Release 5 as soon as possible. We've had conversations with various suppliers and we're really mindful that some have got bigger teams, whereas for smaller publishers, Release 5 can present quite an overhead. It can be a bit of a challenge. But having said that, we think that consistent, comparable measurement is obviously the ultimate goal. And as a community, I think we need to be working together to encourage that and encourage that to happen as soon as possible. So that's an update on what things that we've been working on and where we're going. So I'll hand over to Paul now for a demo.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm just going to run through a few of the changes in the new system, and then all being well with the technology, I'll give you a couple of minutes worth of demo just to show you what the new interface will look like, and also the couple of basic R5 reports, just so you can get a feel of what we're going to be offering you. So there are a number of changes that are happening. I mean, Joe's already outlined the development activity that's been taking place, and one of the other things to bear in mind that's been happening behind the scenes is we've been transitioning to a new server. So we've been having to maintain the existing service as well as building the new R5 service, get the current service as it is at the moment, working on the new infrastructure and so on. So there's an awful lot of work that's gone on behind the scenes, even if it seems like there isn't a great deal of R5 stuff in place at the moment. So in terms of what's going to change, we've streamlined the login and the authorization process. So I think one of the annoyances for people was having logged in with Shibboleth, there was a pop-up box for many people. We've now done away with that. There's a far more seamless method of access between the different areas of the new system. There'll be a whole new reporting area dedicated to the Counter Release 5 reports. And as I'll show you in a moment, don't worry about the JUSP that you currently know and love. All the functionality, all the reports are still there and will operate in exactly the same way as they do now. So you can look at all the R4 data as you do at present. One of the biggest changes is the updated homepage. And again, I'll come and show you some of the new features of that in a moment. In terms of R5, there's going to be a smaller number of reports and visualizations than you're used to with the R4. However, there's going to be a lot more flexibility in terms of the way that we present this and how you can amend stuff as you're running the reports. One change we're hoping to make is to provide complete aggregator reports for journals. So at the moment, for example, for a service such as EBSCO or ProQuest, we only extract out certain publishers that are signed up to JUSP, and there's no way for you to run a full EBSCO JR1 report presently in JUSP. In the new system, all being well, that should be possible. You'll be able to run the R5 EBSCO journal reports or master reports. One of the big changes is that we are removing a lot of the title and deal functionality, partly because it was a big overhead on us to maintain, and also because there are other services such as JISC's Knowledge Base Plus, KB Plus, which does this far, far better and more comprehensively than we're able to do so. So a lot of that functionality around being able to look at what titles are in a particular deal should no longer be done through the JUSP interface, but elsewhere. Okay, so on the screen at the moment is the brand new JUSP interface on the new system, and you'll see straight away it's divided into two very distinct areas. The top half of the screen is where you can access all the different reports, and you'll notice that's in three sections. There's a new section for the R5 reports, and then a replication of the existing two interfaces where you can run your R4 journal reports or your R4 book and other reports. And underneath that is a new administration section. And this is where we would envisage that any admin that you wish to do, such as looking at your data, looking at publisher issues or the publisher wish list, administering Sushi for those who like to use the JUSP data and export it into your own ERMs and other systems, all that's going to be done here. This is a much tidier way of doing this now, because at the moment you had to do certain bits of admin within the journals portal and certain bits of admin within the book and other portal, and now it's all brought into one place. So any of the tidy or admin type work you will do on this front screen, which you can easily navigate back to at any point, as we'll show you in a moment. So if we just look at a couple of the tabs, On the front screen, of course, you've got your news items, which will bring up to date and populate fully before launch. We have a quite handy R5 status tab. It's quite depressing reading at the moment, but you will see an update for each of the suppliers that we work with within JUSP. You'll be able to see the status. In most cases, it'll just be a few words basically saying things such as working with supplier X to resolve issues, as you can see on the screen at the moment with Highwire there. And some were waiting for details. And if we scroll down to Science Direct, which is quite a way down the list based on the number of suppliers, Science Direct, tested and working. So as I'll show you in a moment, that's the first one that we've got R5 data for, and that's all up and running. Okay. Then we have two tabs, one which is R5 data and one which is R4 data. So for the R5 data, that will be populated as we start to add R5 reports. So in this case, you can see for this dummy institution, we have Science Direct, platform and title reports, and you'll see the start and end dates there. Under R4 data, this now brings together all the stuff that you previously had to go between the journal and the book portals to get. So for each publisher, you can see the different types of report and the different start and end dates, which makes things quite clear in terms of when certain report types were added into the system, etc. You can filter that by journals, books, platforms, databases, and we're actively working to improve the filtering here. So for example, if you want to look at all the R5, the JR5 reports or the BR2s or something like that, we'll probably have a function enabling you to do that, just to filter it down even further. And then there's the other usual tabs. So there's restated data, publisher issues, wish list, all the sorts of stuff you've got at the moment. And then if you click on the community one, Laura, that's where we've populated. It's a familiar area to some of you, I'm sure, where we have presentations, spreadsheets, etc., that you, the community, have supplied. And we'll hope to build on this area as we go forward. So that's the front screen, and hopefully that will be a much more cohesive and simple way of doing all your admin and working out what's in the system for you. But in terms of actually moving through to the live system, so if we click on the journals R4, first of all, and this will take you through to a very familiar looking page. So this basically replicates the existing journal R4 system, and as Laura's showing you, all the same reports are available, with the exception of the titles and deals stuff that we've removed. So it's a shorter list, but all the main functional reports are still there and replicated, and will run in exactly the same way as you're familiar with. If we move to the book and other R4 portal, which we can do from the top nav bar, again, the book reports are the same. We've just lost the various admin tasks, which are now up front, and there are all the different book reports you can run. And then if we go back to the portal homepage, possibly the most interesting bit, and I'm sure a bit that a lot of you have come along to listen to and to discover about, is the R5 section. So if we move through to the R5 reports, okay, so from the drop-down menu, you will notice, first of all, a fairly small list of reports, and that's because at this point, the two active suppliers are only supplying valid TR and PR reports. As we get the database or all the item reports, they will be added in here. And as we build additional functionality, such as things like the SCONL return and annual summaries, trends, all the sort of stuff you've come to expect from JUSP, this menu will be populated with further reports, or we'll have a different menu providing you with access to the additional stuff. So if we just have a quick look at one or two of the reports, without going into any great detail, as that's what the support materials will be for. So this is the TRJ1 reports, which is your journal requests excluding OA Gold. So now from the report types, you have an option. So if you look at the drop-down menu, you have standard view, which is what Paul Needham was talking about a little bit earlier, which is the precise counter standard display, which has its pros and cons. So we'll have a look at this. So we select Science Direct, run it for January, and you'll notice a few things different to the existing journal system. First of all, we have pagination at the top, so you can select just a few results on each page, and you can easily jump between pages. And there are also two clear export buttons, so you can export in comma separated or tab separated format for exporting into Excel or other software. And then when you come to look at the actual report itself, the first thing that strikes you is the enormous amount of identifiers and information. And this is the standard view of this type of report. So you can see it's not massively usable because there are endless identifiers on the screen. You know, there's 5 or 6 there. Okay, and you need to scroll across to the right to see the actual numbers, even though there's only 1 month's worth of data. And the first thing that's different, again, you can see is the metric type. So in this case, we have total item requests and unique item requests for each item. And you get the reporting period total and then the individual monthly breakdowns. So again, there are lots of differences between this type of display and what you're familiar with in the existing journal system. Another thing you'll notice is there's no total, there's no overall totals at the top, and that's because in the standard view, there is no requirement to do this. However, that's where the custom view of these reports comes in. So if we switch from the standard view to the custom view for the same report and run it with the same parameters. Okay. So immediately at the top, just above the navigation, you can see we have some summary totals, and this will change depending on which report you're running. So it will show each of the different metric types and a total count. And it's possible to compare the total counts that you see with total counts in the R4 system. As Joe mentioned, I've done a lot of work in looking at the Science Direct reports in R5 versus the Elsevier JR1 and JR2 and book reports and so on and so forth for January. And the numbers between the two systems, once you've got a handle on what metric means what between the two, it's quite easy to work out the numbers and if things are looking right. Again, the support materials, etc., will cover all this in far more detail than my basic waffling now. Okay, so that's the title report. So if we have a very quick look at the platform report, which is much, much simpler. So we have platform usage. Again, we'll pick Science Direct for January, and there's the very basic report, and you can see the different metric types with the different numbers. And again, it's possible to use those numbers in conjunction with the title reports or the book reports, the title for journals and books. You can add them together to find out total item requests and things like that. So again, quite a simple report, but quite powerful in a way because you can then go and examine it a little bit further. And I think at this point, that's all I need to say. Obviously, we can take questions at the end. So if you do have any questions about the report presentations or displays, please save them, put them in the chat box and we'll cover them at the end. And I think that's all I need to demo at this point.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, I'm just going to switch back to the slides now. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, just quickly to highlight a few extra resources that are currently available to you. So we have a news page on our website where we're providing updates on Counter Release 5 and what we're doing. At the bottom of that, there's also some links to some Counter resources, so some guides, video guides and written guides produced by Counter, which give an overview of the new reports. Some of you may be aware that recently Elsevier with Counter ran a webinar looking at the Counter Release 5 reports, and you can view that from the Elsevier website. I've left a link there for you. And we're also running, as I said, a training session on the 30th of April. Registration isn't open yet, but it hopefully will be in the next couple of weeks. And in this training session, we're going to look more closely at the Counter reports, what they look like in JUSP, and how you would use them in practice. Okay, so now we're going to hand over to you for questions. Let me just take a look at the chat. Yeah, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat, please. Okay, we've got a question here from Sarah. What is the difference between title and item?
I'll answer that, Paul Needham. Titles are typically books or journals. So you could think of them as sort of buckets of stuff. A journal is a composite thing made up of many issues and individual articles, and again a book, although you may download it as a whole book, is typically composed of chapters. An item is something quite atomic, and those of you who are familiar with your own institutional repositories will know that you don't typically in a repository put journals, but you do put articles in, and an article is an item in its own right. The distinction can be blurred, but basically think of titles as buckets and items of the things that you might find in a bucket.
We'll also be covering these questions. So any questions that you put in the chat now, we'll make sure are covered in our FAQs and our guides. Okay, we've got another question from Azedra about, is the Sconnell report going to be based on R4 or R5? It's going to be based, the new Sconnell report is going to be based on the R5 data, because that's how Sconnell are going to be requesting the information. We are actually going to be working with Sconnell to produce the report. Jo, I don't know whether you want to say anything more about that.
No, other than say we are sort of envisaging having a meeting with Sconnell reps in early April, and we want to work with them to get their requirements, and I guess just to make sure that we are aligned in terms of providing support and advice to people asking these types of questions. But we'll be providing more information, I think, after that meeting in April.
Yeah, and of course, when we're talking about the 18-19 year, there's obviously going to be the back end of 2018 data, if that's included, is obviously going to be R4 data. So one of the things that we'll be discussing with Counter is how we match up the R4 and the R5 and what impact that would have on this sort of overlapping year's return. Obviously, from 1920 onwards, I think it'd be a lot clearer because we'll be dealing with R5 data, but you know, there is obviously going to be this transition period, which is going to affect a lot of the additional reports that we're building and the data visualizations as well. So that will have a spin-off, certainly for that back end of 2018, early part of 2019 period.
Yeah, and just to add that there are guidelines in the Release 5 Code of Practice on how to deal with that transition between R4 and R5. As I indicated earlier, there are some metrics which are common points between R4 and R5. In JUSP's case, we're still devising the best way to handle that, but we know at the publisher end they will be adopting, I think it's one of 3 different methods to accomplish that, which, as I say, are specified in the Code of Practice.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Okay, the next question is from Chantal. In the JUSP Release 5 portal, are you going to make master reports available? I could only see the TRJ one, which I thought was a standard view. That's correct, that is a standard view, and I think, yeah, the
yes.
Yes, and cool.
Yes, the answer is, simple answer to that is yes, we are or will be working on a form that enables you to slice and dice a master report. Just to say, we only actually harvest master reports from the vendors. We don't harvest the standard views. So what we do is we harvest the master report, break it down and get it into a relational database, and the tables in the database effectively do contain the master reports. It's just so far the only views we've produced are the standard or custom views derived from the standard views. It's in our list to provide an all singing, all dancing form that enables you to slice and dice or to retrieve complete master reports.
Okay, so the next one is, will core titles selected in KB Plus still show in the R5 reports? I think Paul can answer this one.
Yeah, I'll say that one. The plan is yes. We haven't quite worked out how to do that at the moment. And similar, I'm assuming there'll be a similar question from someone about DOAJ markup as well. Where possible, we'll include DOAJ markup in the title reports. I'll certainly be working on functionality to include the core titles. Yeah, and this is all part of the custom view as opposed to the standard view.
Okay, the next one, the title report shows all views and unique views in the same report. Will you be able to just specify one or the other? Otherwise, will we have 2 lines for each journal in the report?
Yeah, the answer is yes, you will be able to specify one or the other. As I say, we'll be working on making the full master reports available, and one of the things you'll be able to do there is say, well, actually all I want to do is see the total item requests or just the unique item requests, and you'll be able to set that as a filter and get report, and it will do what you want. And just to add from a counter perspective, the standard views we've produced so far are those that we know are likely to address the most common usage cases. But what we're hoping is over a period of time, as everybody, as R5 beds in and we all start using it, is that further sort of common use cases will emerge, in which case, if there was, for example, a call across the board just for a report that gave the total item requests, or just for a report that gave unique metrics, then in time we would aim to incorporate that as an additional standard view. So the situation is at the moment, you've got that limited set of standard views for the most common use cases. You will have the ability to see a whole master report in all its glory, or to filter and to specify which columns and metric types you want to show in that master report. So, as I was saying before, the whole point of, or one of the main points of 5 is that it is very flexible. Of course, the thing about flexibility is there's potentially a lot to think about there. So it will be an exercise that involves the community, which will help to inform Counter which are the most common requirements, and we'll make sure that appropriate standard views to match those common requirements come into force. And of course, you'll always still be able to produce any views that are possible out of the master reports for yourself if they've not been defined as a predefined standard view.
Yeah, the other thing to bear in mind is as well that we're at a fairly basic stage in terms of customizing the functionality, etc. Simply because until literally last week, there was no data to work with from any supplier. So although we had kind of in our heads a wish list and features we'd like to incorporate, it's literally now that we're starting to actually be able to build this, because we've just not had any reports to work with.
Absolutely right. Yes, as we get a growing body of data in the system, it will be a lot easier for us to give specific responses to these questions rather than just generic answers.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Okay, moving on. So next question is from Sarah. When is the new JUSP site being released? It's going to be the 1st of April as a soft launch, and you'll be able to access it from that point onwards, and we'll obviously send out notifications to the list.
Yeah, so I mean, what we've shown you today may change very slightly ahead of that date. There's also a new website where some of the functionality is slightly improved, some of the navigation's made a bit easier. So we're launching the website and the portal all at the same time on the new server. Yeah, as Laura says, April the 1st is the go live date, and then expect things to change almost constantly from that point onwards until we have the reports in place. It's going to be a few months, I think, before we get much of the functionality up and running fully and replicated. When certainly we need several months worth of data before we can build a lot of the additional reports.
Thank you, Paul. Next question, will R5 require new sushi credentials for all suppliers? So
yes and no. Our experience so far, quite a few publishers have come back and said, no, the credentials will be exactly the same as we're using at the moment. We know for the publishers on the Scholarly IQ platform, which includes OUP, which is the one we've contacted you about initially, yes, everyone has to get a new requester ID. And if you're having trouble with that we know people are, please go to the OUP customer support to ask about that. We know people are having trouble accessing the new accounts or generating the new requesters. Other suppliers have promised to send us new credentials. So, as and when we need anything from you, we will, of course, let you know as soon as we can. But at this point, we're literally just testing most of the publishers, and the early indication is that a lot of credentials will remain the same. So it won't be new for everybody and for everything, no.
Yeah, and just to note on the OUP, I have sent a survey link, a form to all of the main contacts within JUSP. If they or you haven't responded, if you could, when you were able to access the details, if you could send the details through that form, that'd be much appreciated. But of course, if you have any questions about it, or if you haven't received that form, can you please contact the help desk? Okay, next we have, you mentioned that you will be able to provide complete aggregated reports. Does this include society titles which you are not able to display in R4 as it required a separate license?
No, I think we probably just have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and it would very much depend on how it fits with our existing participation agreement. So I think if people have got a list of suppliers that they're interested to get feedback on, if you could get in touch with the help desk, and then we'll respond.
Yeah, and just to add, I'm aware of a couple of cases where publishers are looking perhaps to incorporate the usage from society titles into their regular reports going forward, if that's appropriate to do. Again, it's on a case-by-case basis. So the answer to that is, in some cases, yes, some cases, no. And as Joe says, we'll just have to take one at a time and see.
The next question, can we harvest R5 reports via JUSP to AMPA?
Yeah, this is an answer in several parts. Just at the moment, no. At some point in the future, the answer will be yes. But there's two things have to happen. One, we have to develop the new RESTful sushi API that we would put that would sit over JUSP, enabling machine communication. And two, Alma would have to do work at their end to use the RESTful API as opposed to the old SOAP XML service. So in the short term, no. In the longer term, yes.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, we've gone over the hour by a few minutes, and I can't see any more questions coming in. Of course, if you do have any questions or feedback, feel free to contact us via the help desk, help@jisc.ac.uk. Just remember to mention JUSP so it gets directed to us. Thank you all very much for attending and listening, and to our speakers.
Yeah, bye everybody.
Bye.
Yes, bye everyone.
Bye.